Okay. Okay. Well, welcome to Mr. Mack-Poole's lesson on Berlin. This is the first time I'm using screencasting, so I hope you appreciate it. Bit of Armageddon teaching, we're making do. Now, these slides are a slight version to what Mr. Watkins has used. Mine are a little bit more simplified. His is more of an in-depth look. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to present my screen, entire screen, and just walk and talk you through this lesson, which I've got planned here. So let me take it to the top. Now, unfortunately, because I've put videos on this slide, it means that I'm not able to play them, but I'll share the link with you and you can watch them. So what we're looking at, you can see I'm very, very visual there. What you're looking at there is the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. And we've got some key characters up there. Well, on the top left, you should know this is Gorbachev, and he's famous for his mulberry birthmark on his forehead. But he should be more famous for two things, and that is his, well, two things inside of one thing. You've got his new thinking, so that's perestroika and glasnost. So glasnost is transparency. The way I remember it is glasshouse. Glasshouse is transparent. Glasshouse, glasnost, transparency. And what that really means is freedom of speech. We've also got other significant individuals, such as Ronald Reagan, bottom left, who was made into a cartoon by Family Guy, so I thought I'd put on there as a little joke. Ronald Reagan's very interesting because he started a couple of policies which put the USSR, the Soviet Union, on the back foot in the Cold War. One of them is called Reaganomics, and that is about a Laffer curve, and in essence, about reducing taxation for the richest. So he created an economic boom in America. That economic boom in America wasn't replicated or matched by the Soviet Union. So America became a lot more powerful, at least in economic terms, in the 1980s. He also put a lot of pressure on the Soviet Union by going to Berlin in 1987 and demanding that Gorbachev tear down this wall. So anyway, and on the top right, believe it or not, David Hasselhoff features in The Fall of the Berlin Wall. So he starts a song, and the song is called I'm Searching for Freedom. Anyway, moving on, I've got a cheeky little starter here. So if you're using lesson, we'll go through this. So we've got a picture round, we've got a true or false round there, okay? So you should be able to identify those people in those pictures, and you should be able to know what is true or false out of these questions here. So just moving forward and go through the answers. Now, Jan Palach self-immolated himself. He set himself on fire in the 1968 Prague Spring. So by the way, this is just a recap. This is what we do in class. It's a recap starter so that we have different parts of the course in our minds, and we just like what I call spinning plates, revising multiple topics. So yeah, anyway, Jan Palach was a protester, and he self-immolated himself. He set himself on fire, which is the ultimate form of protest. And there is a plaque, a memento to him in Prague, which is now part of the Czech Republic. Now, you should all recognize this gentleman here, and that is Imre Nagy. Imre Nagy was the focal leader of the 1956 Hungarian uprising, and he left the Warsaw Pact in 1956. Subsequently, he was arrested by the USSR after the failed uprising, and he was executed in 1958. He was hung by the neck for basically being a traitor to Hungary. Now, the man that needs no introduction, Fidel Castro, famous for the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Before that, the 1961 Bay of Pigs, which his troops successfully defeated. That was a failed invasion attempt by former Cuban exiles, and it was just a complete fiasco. He's also famous for his 1953 to 1959 revolution in Cuba, which was, of course, ultimately successful, and he lived until 2016. So he lived a very long life. He far outlived JFK. Now, beneath him is General Marshall. General Marshall started martial aid. And martial aid was a continuation of the Truman Doctrine. And it helped rebuild the war-torn economies of Europe to ensure that the spread of communism in the 1950s, 1940s from Eastern Europe so that communism didn't spread from the Eastern Bloc to the Western Bloc. And last but not least, we have Jimmy Carter, who set up the Carter Doctrine and signed SALT II, and he wanted to protect the oil. Now, he's seen as a weak president, and the reason he's seen as a weak president is because he failed to roll communism back. If you compare him to the subsequent president, which was Ronald Reagan wasn't satisfied with containing communism. He said that Marxism, Leninism would end up on the ash heap of history. He completely pressured his his equal, I guess, in the Soviet Union. That would be Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet leader, to tear down that wall. So, true or false round? Reagan said communism would end up on the scrap heap. It just says SCARP, it should say scrap heap, that's a mistake there. Or ash heap of history. That is false. Oh, yes, it's false because he said it ended up on the ash heap of history. There we go. Stalin fell out with Truman over Berlin's currency. That is true. It led to the Berlin airlift. Castro loved JFK. That is false. Oh, they really did not like each other at all. Jimmy Carter and Brezhnev signed SALT I. That is, of course, false because they signed SALT II. And last but not least, Gorbachev's new thinking was around openness. That is categorically true. It is true. It was called glasnost. There you go. So look, moving on. By the end of this lesson, you understand why the Berlin Wall fell down. Okay? And a good way of thinking of this is just imagine if London, if we had lost, if Britain had lost World War II to Italy and Germany, and they divided London into two sections between Italy and Germany. Okay, and the two sides, and Italy and Germany had a Cold War with one another, and the two sides weren't allowed to mix. Well, how would you see your families? You may have family dotted across southeast and southwest London. You might live in southwest London in the centre, and your family. So you could have family, you could live here, and then you could have family just over there. But with this dividing line, you wouldn't be able to see them. That's essentially what the Berlin Wall did. So it's regarded as very, very inhumane. Now, moving on quickly. I went through this, by the way, on my YouTube channel the other day in about 4 minutes. So I'm going to go with the 4 main reasons why the Berlin Wall fell down. So one is the huge amount of diplomatic pressure that Ronald Reagan put on Gorbachev. And he had that fiery speech in 1987. Now, I'm going to put a link to that video because the video is really good. And he gets a massive cheer when he's in West Berlin. Now, don't forget that wall had been a huge problem from 1961 all the way to 1989. There's lots of videos about people trying to cross and how terrible it was. But even before that point, there was always conflicts around Berlin. And it all goes back, and this is what I teach when I teach the Cold War. It all goes back into the 3 conferences. If you look at Yalta, Potsdam, Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam, sorry. If you look at those 3 conferences, the red lines, the dotted agreements, the I's dotted, the T's crossed there, that really sets up the New World Order, the rules for the future. And it's really adhered to for 50 years. But for some reason, the Soviet Union, I don't know if Stalin was in a good mood because they just defeated Nazi Germany, they allowed the Western powers to have sections or zones of control in Berlin. And Berlin was actually in the eastern part of Germany, in the communist Soviet dominated part of Germany. So it's a really weird outlier. But there you go. And it had created diplomatic strains all throughout the Cold War. There'd been a lot of tension in Berlin, of course, leading to the Checkpoint Charlie crisis in 1961 after the Berlin Wall was just established by, of course, Khrushchev. So if you look throughout the entire Cold War, from Stalin and Truman to Khrushchev and JFK, from Reagan and Gorbachev, there'd always been tension over this wall. It'd been a symbol of the tension, a symbol of the divide between communism and capitalism. Secondly, glasnost. So Gorbachev's key reform was around openness and his new thinking. So if he was around openness and freedom of speech, well, how could he maintain this wall, which represents divide? If you're, oh, I'm all for transparency, oh, but not in Berlin because there's a massive wall there. So I think that Gorbachev's softer line on the West and his essential philosophy, which is around freedom of speech, that's glasnost, and kind of a capitalist restructure of economy, that's perestroika, it means that he's more willing to shake hands with the West. In fact, he does sign treaties with Ronald Reagan. So he was also Time Man of the Year because of his openness to the West. So he's a major, major character. And he's always questioned whether he's a communist. And I also question around Gorbachev whether he truly wanted to maintain the Soviet Union, because it goes out with a whimper and not with a bang. And he doesn't take a hard line. He really does not take a hard line during this Cold War. So David Hasselhoff. Yes, really. I know a lot of people think this is a joke, but it's not. Hasselhoff released a single called "I've Been Looking for Freedom," which has topped the charts for over 8 weeks during the summer of 1989. It truly did become an anthem, which symbolized the struggle for unification. Don't forget that the German people ardently, passionately desired unification. And communism isn't very fun to live under. So I can't talk for all communism. It's a bit of a broad theory, but the communist system that was enacted under the Soviet Union, well, it just removes basic human freedoms of choice. For instance, I always say to my students that you couldn't buy Levi jeans in the Soviet Union. You couldn't go to McDonald's or Burger King. You couldn't make those basic everyday choices which capitalism affords us. Being locked up in your house now and having a lack of choice, it's a little bit boring, isn't it? Okay, so I just think that the communist system didn't make people truly happy. I'm not saying capitalism does, by the way. I think the communist system, in the way it was enacted in the Soviet Union, I don't think it led to the greatest happiness for all. Okay, so there's these great videos. Okay, so we've got that silly little jokey one there, looking for freedom. We've got BBC News footage and BBC Two there. So I'm going to put those links on the Google Classroom, and I suggest you watch them because it will give you a good idea of what happened. And we need to think about the consequences as well. Okay, so rather than just thinking what we've learned today, let's think of the consequences. So after 1989, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, in 1991, the Soviet Union falls. Okay, so the fall of the Berlin Wall is iconic. It's so symbolic. It's so significant. It can't be underestimated. It really cannot be underestimated. It's truly of importance because it just leads to the end of the communist system, doesn't it? Really, it's just it's 2 years before the whole communist system collapses. So we can't say it's insignificant. So what have we learned today? We've learned that the Berlin Wall fell for a variety of reasons. However, the weakness of the USSR, the strength of Reagan's USA, and the people power of a divided nation certainly played an integral part. Okay, and we'll look at the fall of the whole Soviet Union in another lesson. So that is it. That is me done there. So let's go back to my screencast. It is here. So I'm going to stop presenting, right? And I'm going to, well, I don't know, how do I end this video now? Right, if I press leave call, what will happen? Or what do I do? And I'd press stop recording. Okay.